Vedic astrology is probably a lot older. I believe it's probably 10,000, 15,000 years old, at least. And it's a system that was developed in ancient India by people who were very highly conscious, enlightened beings. They had all these powers and gifts, and they could almost divine the nature of the universe. And they started sharing their understanding of how the universe works in this oral tradition that was unbroken, passed from generation to generation through oral tradition. In the Indian system, we say these are constellations, and the Sanskrit word for constellation is Rashi. And Rashi means a heap of energy. So in India, we believe that these heaps of energy, these star constellations, actually exert energy on you. And so by knowing where they are accurately with math, you know what energy is being cast on you. So we look at this as an energetic system rather than a symbolic system. I think a lot of people kind of bumble along, and by trial and error, they figure things out. And here's this very elegant system that has been passed down for thousands of years, and it's integrated and maintained, and it's literally a procedural way to tap into the universe, to really listen to what your soul is trying to tell you and start to honor that, live a life aligned to your deeper soul, not based on what programming you had from parents or society or peer groups. Really start to live for you.
Our guest today is Vish Chatterji. Vish is a celebrated Vedic astrologer, yogi, and business coach. He makes the ancient wisdom of India accessible and actionable for modern seekers, helping them find balance and success through true self-understanding. Vish holds a degree in mechanical engineering from Northwestern University, an MBA from the University of Michigan, and an executive coaching certificate from UC Berkeley. He has also studied in the traditional Himalayan ashrams and at the Chopra Center for Wellbeing. And today he is debuting his second book titled Astrology Decoded, The Secret Science of India's Sages. So we want to welcome you to the show, Vish. It's so nice to have you join us, and congratulations on the new book launch today. That's so exciting.
Thank you, Tara. It's very exciting. This book has been, a couple of years in the making. It takes a long time to get a book out there. And today it launches, and you are my first conversation of the day. So it's very exciting.
Well, we are so honored for that. Thank you so much for letting us speak with you on this very special day, and we're super excited for you. And we are also very interested in this topic. Astrology is one of those things that has always been a bit of a mystery to me, so I'm really excited to dive in and learn more about it. And I know that you have a very unique understanding around a specific type of astrology, so we can't wait to learn more about that. But before we get started down that road, I know that your background is as an engineer. So I find that pretty fascinating because typically engineers are very, scientifically related in terms of how they think. They like to have hard facts. So I'm kind of just curious if you can share with us, related to your background as an engineer, how did you get started down this path of astrology and learning about astrology? Because some people kind of call this a bit of a pseudoscience. So I just find that an interesting juxtaposition. Can you share a little bit more with us about that?
Yeah, so I shared the same view. I was trained as a mechanical engineer. I worked as an engine engineer in the auto industry. Then I went to business school and worked as an executive in the auto industry as well. Rose up the ranks of executive management, managed lots of different businesses. And I was always the very skeptical business leader. So if somebody in my team came to me with a business idea, I was saying, okay, where are the numbers? Where's the data? How do you know this business is going to work in the market? So I do have a very skeptical mindset, but along my entire 20-year corporate career, I always had a daily morning yoga and meditation practice. And I found that, from my own experience, if I practiced my yoga in the morning, did my meditation, I just got through the day in a more resilient, smoother, easier way. So I always believed that yoga had some merit. And then, of course, as we've seen in the last 5-10 years, there's a lot of data and science coming out proving that yoga does indeed help your bones, your organs, your muscles, your joints, your circulatory system, your hormonal system, all of that. And so I felt like, okay, I had this belief that yoga has a health benefit, and sure enough, science proved it. And when I finally exited my crazy executive career and decided to go into coaching, I became an executive coach, and I was trying to help leaders find more balance in their leadership existence. And so I started to teach yoga and meditation to business executives. And, 8, 10 years ago, that was a bit of a stretch. Today, it's like, yeah, of course, most people in very high stress roles meditate. And along the way, I started discovering the Ayurveda, the mind-body medicine system of ancient India, which also to me seemed a little bit, esoteric. Instead of pills and drugs, you take herbs, and instead of going to the doctor for an injection, you start to do daily practices and routines to improve your health. And sure enough, modern science is proving that that actually does work, right? If you align yourself to circadian rhythms, you start to eat the right foods for your constitution, you have better health. And along the way in Ayurveda, I learned that there's these 3 mind-body constitutions that people might have. And so I would give my clients a quiz. I would have them fill out this quiz to figure out what is their mind-body constitution, and based on that, recommend lifestyle changes, diet changes, leadership approaches. And I was noticing that a lot of my executive clients were cheating on my quiz. In corporate America, if you're a type A personality, you usually get promoted. And so whatever the quiz was that I would give them, they would almost self-select the answers to be a type A fiery personality. But what I was seeing in front of me was not that fire. I was seeing an airy person, or a watery or earthy person. I was like, this is not lining up. So I went to my Ayurvedic teacher, and he said, Vish, just look at their birth chart and you'll really understand them. And I said, birth chart? Are you talking about that astrology stuff? That's all hocus pocus. I don't believe in that. I'm a scientist. I'm an engineer. Like I don't believe that's kind of pseudoscience, right? As you said, Tara. And he said, no, look at the Indian system, do the math, you'll see it. It's quite accurate. So I started to learn from him the basics, and I would pull up a birth chart of a client at the moment they were born, and I would interpret from that chart and say, hey, you're a very earthy type. And I would ask them some questions about the way they lead, and they would say to me, like, Vish, how do you know that about me? How do you know me so well? And I said, I don't know. I'm just looking at some planets in space when you were born. I'm trying to prove it to myself. And after doing this, 10, 50, 100 times over, I started to think, wow, there's some logic here. I'm getting an empirical proof that if I look at somebody's birth chart, I'm starting to really understand them. So why the skepticism, right? And then I realized that the Western system of astrology that is in the mainstream conversation is not observable in the sky. The math they use to calculate your birth chart in a Western astrologers system doesn't match to the actual sky. And so when you correct the math in the Indian system, the Vedic system of astrology uses accurate math to the astronomical position of the sky, you start to get a much different picture of somebody. And that's what started to open up for me. It's like, if I can figure out somebody's personality from their birth chart, what else can I do with it? And that just opened up this wormhole of diving into Vedic astrology and getting deeper and deeper into it. And now it's over and over proven itself to be very powerful for my work.
That's quite a story, because coming from being an engineer to astrology to Vedic astrology, what's really fascinating about that, Vish, is that you started off as a skeptic, probably a hardcore one. There's so much out there that people don't want to understand. My boyfriend's one of them. He's like, well, that's all hogwash. And it's like, and he's very much like you. So it's nice to hear someone like you take that step and be open to it. Moving on, could you explain, as you mentioned it, the difference between the Western way of astrology versus the Vedic?
Yeah, definitely. And I was, similar to your boyfriend, I would even just as recently as a year or two ago, if you told me I went to a Western astrologer, I would have said that's hogwash because of this math correction thing that I'm talking about. But I've had a lot of clients who've been to Western astrologers and had phenomenal readings, right? So then I'm thinking, what's going on there? Even though they're not using the right positions of the stars in the sky, there's some value there. There's some insight there. So I started to open my mind a little bit and realize, like, what is going on here? And I think, there is a elegant, sophisticated mechanism in the way consciousness works. And it's way beyond any of our human comprehension. And so we as human beings, our mind, as intelligent as it is, cannot explain every single thing to do with consciousness in our universe. And different people, based on their skills, their abilities, their powers, they're tapping into bits and pieces of consciousness and learning things. And then they're applying that. And so many of the people that are on your show have these abilities. They see things, they understand things that the rest of us can't quite comprehend or add up. And so, because of us not wanting to think about it, we say, oh, that's hogwash, right? But I'm starting to realize that people that have powers and intuitive abilities, they can use anything and make a framework or an understanding of consciousness. So Western astrologer using a bunch of symbols on a chart that is not accurate to the actual sky still finds deep insight into that particular client's journey and challenges. What's beautiful about the Vedic system is because the underlying math is really good, even if your intuition isn't great, even if you don't have any psychic abilities, you can still do a lot with it. So that was kind of the first game changer for me. My intuition was sort of weaker because I was so logical minded. And the more logical you are, the less intuitive you are. It seems to be this seesaw, right? And so I was able to use very basic, okay, I look at the time you're born, what are the stars, where are the planets, where are they exactly located at the moment of your birth by astronomical math. And based on that, say, hey, if this planet is here, this star is here, this zodiac sign is here, it must mean this for you in this area of your life. And then when the client would tell me, yeah, that's correct, I'd say, wow, I just added up the dots. Interesting. And as I kept doing it and practicing, that system of Vedic astrology started to open up some intuitive abilities in me. And now intuitively, I'm able to also read things. Whereas the Western astrologer has to really have strong intuition to begin with, I believe, for that to make sense. And we're all just trying to interpret consciousness at the end of the day. So the fundamental difference, I would say, is Vedic astrology is probably a lot older. I believe it's probably 10,000, 15,000 years old, at least. And it's a system that was developed in ancient India by people who are very highly conscious, enlightened beings. They had all these powers and gifts, and they could almost divine the nature of the universe. And they started sharing their understanding of how the universe works in this oral tradition that was unbroken, passed from generation to generation through oral tradition. And then finally, we believe about 5,000 years ago, they started to write it down. Some of the earliest writings known to humankind were from 5,000 years ago from these Indian knowledge system. And then somewhere along the way, I believe about 2,000 years ago, between trade of India and the Middle East and the Greeks and the Romans, these systems started to be taught. And then Western astrology emerged. And the reason I can say that Western astrology emerged probably around 200 AD is because at that time, the Western calculation and Indian calculation were identical. And then the Western system drifted every year by a little bit. And now, about 2,000 years later, the Western system has drifted by about 23 degrees of space. So it's not correct to the sky. And I asked a Western astrologer, how do you resolve that? The fact that what you have in a chart, what you see with a client in front of you, is not actually what you see out the window in the sky. And they said, look, we use the symbolism of the sky, and then we create a chart. So we're using the signs. They call them signs, whereas in India, we call them constellations. So the Western astrologer says these are signs that mean something, and however they show up the way we calculate it, that means something for you. In the Indian system, we say these are constellations, and the Sanskrit word for constellation is Rashi. And Rashi means a heap of energy. So in India, we believe that these heaps of energy, these star constellations, actually exert energy on you. And so by knowing where they are accurately with math, you know what energy is being cast onto you. So we look at this as an energetic system rather than a symbolic system. We look at it as a constellation rather than a sign. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and actually, the way I understand what you just said is you could look at astrology from a textbook perspective, and anybody could probably read the stars or the signs, if you will, and get information. But if you look at it through an energetic standpoint and use your intuition, you actually get much more from it. And that obviously takes a lot more understanding about what's happening with those constellations. So there's different ways to approach it, but it sounds like this is a much more in-depth look at how to read astrology and read someone's chart. That's kind of the way I pick up on what you're sharing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the great thing about Western astrology, it's very easy for pop culture, right? It's like, hey, pick up the newspaper, pick up the magazine, or look up on the web, and it says, oh, I'm a Aquarius, and because I was born in whatever month, right? So there's sort of this 30-day month window that you're born in, and then you're assigned that sign. You're like, oh, I'm a blah blah blah, and nobody really understands what that means, right? When somebody says you're an Aquarius, what does that mean? What they're trying to say is that around the month you were born, the sun was in the sky, And that position in the sky behind the sun were the stars of Aquarius. So they say, when somebody says, I'm an Aquarius, they're saying my sun sign is Aquarius. My zodiac sign is Aquarius. My sun was in the position in the sky where Aquarius is. Now, it turns out that's not the case because their math is off. The sun might have actually been one sign over. So that's kind of the first issue, is that there's a bit of an identity crisis. When you correct the math, all of a sudden somebody's sign changes. Like, my sun, in Western astrology, they would say, I'm a sun sign of Cancer. They say, oh, I'm a Cancer. But if you actually correct the math, my sun was in Gemini. So there's an identity crisis. Am I Cancer or am I Gemini, right? Once you correct the math, its sun was actually in Gemini. But then in Vedic astrology, we're not so deeply analyzing the sun position, because it's very much the same for everybody in a 30-day window wherever they were born. So in Vedic astrology, we say the moment you were born, so the spot on planet Earth you were born, at that exact time, if I were to take a telescope and look to the east, what constellation was on that eastern horizon, known as a rising constellation. And so that is different for everybody, even within a day, right? So Tara, wherever you were born, on the eastern horizon was one set of stars. 3 hours later, there was a different set of stars. So somebody born on the same day would have a different sign.
So that actually answers a question for me, because I've looked into having my birth chart read before, and everyone keeps asking me, what time were you born? And I can't find that out. So that would answer why I cannot get an accurate reading.
Yes. So without the birth time, then it's hard to say, okay, what was on that eastern horizon? And so then it becomes challenging to give that very detailed, accurate reading. And there's a way to solve that. I'll get into that. But so the first thing is, what was rising on the eastern horizon? That star constellation influences your personality. Then secondarily, where the moon was when you're born and the constellation it was in helps you understand your emotions and your mind.
I was just going to ask you that, because and I could be wrong, does the moon, the year you're born, is that how you find out what your moon is, your moon rising?
You have to know the day, at least the day, because the moon is in the same. So the rising sign is just the rising constellation on the eastern horizon. Then wherever the moon is, you're just saying, what constellation of stars was the moon in? What was the backdrop of the moon when you're born? And that's good for about a day, about 1 day. So the moon, or I guess 2 days in a sign. The moon is in the same sign for 2 days. Like this morning today, the moon is in Virgo. So, if it was dark out and I looked with a telescope at the moon and looked beyond the moon, I would see the stars of Virgo. And then, of course, if you correct the math, if you uncorrect the math, the moon would be somewhere else. It would be a sign earlier, probably. So a Western astrologer might say, oh, no, Vish, the moon is in Leo today, but it's actually not in Leo, observationally speaking. So the moon sign is a secondary thing. The first thing is the rising sign. Moon sign is secondary. And at a tertiary level, we might analyze the sun sign, which again is same for everybody in 30-day period and incorrectly calculated, observationally speaking, in the Western system.
And this might be a completely uneducated question, but what exactly do all of these planets have to do with us being born at a specific time? Is it that we're receiving energies from these planets that is helping to create our personality type? Is that the idea behind it?
Such a good question. And such a good question from you, Tara. Am I pronouncing your name right? Tara or Tara?
You got it right, Tara. Yes.
Tara. So Tara is actually a Sanskrit word. It's a word in Sanskrit. Do you know what it means?
I've heard. So I'm actually Irish, and so I was named after the Hill of Tara in Ireland. From that perspective, it means place of power, because it was an ancient place in Ireland where all the kings and queens ruled from. But I also do know it's a Sanskrit word, and I believe it means sun.
It means star.
Star. Okay, that's right. I've heard that before.
And
That's
the
right.
star is a place of power. Exactly. So it's just beautiful, right? The Irish
I love
tradition, the
that.
Indian tradition, all these different traditions, they had this understanding of consciousness. So the star is a place of power. Tara is a place of power in the Irish system. In Sanskrit system, it's a star. A star constellation is a place of power. So each of these star constellations have some power over a specific area of your life. And if you think of a human being, we're not just a bundle of bones and muscle and joints walking around. There's something that animates us. There's this sort of, I guess, emotional, psychic level of being. There's something beyond our physical body. There's a subtle body. Then there's an even deeper layer, which is our soul level. So in the yoga tradition, we know we have a physical body, a subtle body, and a causal body, right? So there's 3 different layers of who we are. We're not just bones and joints. There's something that animates us. So same thing with the planets. When you think about a planet, it seems like a collection of rocks and gas in space. At a physical level, that's all it is. Just, Venus is a collection of gas and rock in space. But when you add a subtle layer to it, it has an energy to it. When you add a causal layer, it has an even deeper level. And so the planets subtly influence us on the subtle layer of our consciousness. And in Sanskrit, the word for planet is graha. And graha is the root of the English word grasp. So in a way, a planet is a grasper at a conscious level, at a subconscious level. So when you're born, the moment you are born, the alignment of where the planets are and what star constellations they're in give you a clue into how these planets are going to grasp your consciousness at different types in your life. So for instance, Mars is a warrior planet. It's a planet that its mythology is all around war, aggression, control, and command. So if you're born and at the eastern horizon rising is Mars, the planet Mars, it's going to give you this quality of warrior, operational excellence, leading, commanding, fighting, all of those kind of things. So then when I see somebody who has Mars in their first house, I can tell them this and they'll be like, oh my God, how'd you know that about me? I'm always getting into fights. Like, I'm always getting into arguments. Or, oh, I'm a CEO of a company. I run things. And it's like, oh, okay, there you go. That somehow their conscious oriented them to make choices in life that took them to that place. But as an astrologer, I can see the underlying energy that you could say grasp their consciousness to help make those decisions in life. Now, it isn't all fixed. So that's the other thing about astrology to know is you have the ability to manage these energies. You have the ability, just like if you say, hey, I want to build something outside tomorrow, but I'm going to ignore the weather forecast. You're probably, it's going to rain. You're going to get wet. But by knowing the weather forecast, you can take some preventative measures, put up a tarp, and build in peace without getting wet. So the same thing here, if you know the planetary weather forecast, you can understand the energies at play and better utilize them towards whatever your needs are.
So thank you so much for explaining that, because I was always curious how the planets reflected on to our personality, which now I understand it actually influences our consciousness, which is fascinating. And I know, and you mentioned a little bit earlier that in ancient times that a lot of kings and queens would actually use astrologers. They would actually have their own astrologer that would tell them what to expect or help them make decisions about what's coming up.
Ronald Reagan did too.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
Nancy.
Yeah. In modern times, definitely a lot of American politicians do use astrologers. It's not known. It's kind of kept quiet. But I have quite a few astrologers in India that I know, and they, seem to have a lot of clients in DC. So that's kind of interesting. I'm always curious about that. In India, definitely politicians all have astrologers. And the dead giveaway is if you see an Indian politician, a lot of them have rings on their fingers and they're different gemstones that are connected to planetary energies. So you know that an astrologer advised them, hey, wear this ring to accentuate this particular energy. And so that is very visible in Indian culture. And it's, astrology is very alive in India today. I mean, there's probably over 1 billion people across the Indian diaspora, across the world that use astrology today. It's a live subject, right? In ancient days, yes, kings, queens, they used astrologers to advise them. That was part of their court. I believe my family were once astrologers many, many generations ago, because my lineage comes from a lineage of advisors. We were the advisors at some point. And so I'm like, if we were advisors 10, 15 generations ago, we must have been using astrology. But over the different colonizing forces, we lost that knowledge and we lost that ability, and we went into more Western types of work. We became judges and teachers and lawyers and police officers and executives, right? So we lost our way a little bit.
You're so fascinating, Vish. I swear, you must be like, once people find out you're an astrologer, do you just get swarmed with people wanting you to do a reading for them? Yeah. And how do you how do you respond to that? Because I wanted to ask you right now. I'm like, I would love a reading.
Yeah. So, I don't advertise. I mean, now that I have a book coming out, I guess it's the cat's out of the bag. But for most of the last 8 years, I wasn't very forward that I do astrology. It's more I'm an executive coach, and then when people have the right consciousness to look into astrology, then not everyone's ready for it, right? In fact, I wrote about this in my book. I have quite a few friends and clients who are yoga teachers. They teach yoga, and yoga is a system that comes from ancient India. And when they post on Instagram, they post Western astrology type of things. They're like, oh, the moon is in Leo and it's doing this. And they're, bringing a bunch of Western sort of thinking. And I keep thinking, if you're a yogi and you're following the Indian system of self-development, why wouldn't you then pull the sister science of Vedic astrology? Because that's sister to yoga and the two systems integrate. It's kind of like you have all these Mac devices and then you pull in an Android phone and the whole system kind of crumbles. It doesn't work well. Like, might as well stay within the same system, the Indian system. And one very smart teacher, a yoga teacher, said to me, I understand that Vedic astrology is a look deep into your soul, but Western astrology helps you understand your psychology and sort of your ego-driven nature. And she says, where I'm in my life, I just want to stick with my ego. I'm good with my ego. I don't really want to understand my soul. And I thought, wow, what a self-aware person, but what a travesty to not want to know the workings of your soul. And so I believe that a lot of people aren't ready for that level of depth in understanding their soul, but also that their soul has a divine plan. And so Western astrology is kind of a nice entry level. Oh, here's my psychology. Here's my personality type. Let's just leave it at that. Western astrology gives you this map of your mind, but it doesn't have a predictive power, right? Vedic astrology has a lot of predictive power. We can predict when things will happen in your life and to take action to remedy those things. And then those remedies are also sometimes quite challenging. Not everybody wants to, chant mantras in the morning or, connect to God or divinity on a daily basis. Not everybody wants to do the rituals and things that go along with it, right?
Yeah, and I find it fascinating that this is something that can help you, as you mentioned, look deeper into your soul. It is something I'm interested in. I think a lot of people would be interested in that. And you did mention earlier as well that in relation to the origins of this type of astrology coming from India, I know you have some unique understandings around the suppression of those origins. And I was wondering if you could share some ideas with us around that concept.
Yeah, so a lot of Indian history has been rewritten due to colonial sort of forces, right? So in order to take over a country of 1 billion people, you have to change the narrative, right? That's how politics works, right? You own the narrative, you change the narrative, and then you can sort of control the outcome. And so India flourished at one time with these beautiful systems of Vedic astrology, the Ayurveda mind-body medicine system, the yoga system, the meditation systems, the philosophy systems. And India also used a lot of archetypal worship, right? So when I see a certain planet, like at the moment today here in Redondo Beach, Venus is rising. And Venus is a planet connected to femininity. And here I'm talking to two beautiful women, right? And that's Venus energy for sure. I see her wearing white and pink, I think, and those are Venus colors. So
That's
we're
right.
like Venus is rising on our eastern horizon here in California at the moment, and there's sort of this Venetian energy coming through. But Venus is located in Scorpio, which is the sign of the occult, things that are not normally discussed. And we're discussing things that are non-mainstream subjects, right? So you can see the energy is there and this sophistication of understanding that the Indian people had. And then if you said, hey, Venus also connects to wealth and prosperity, and you want your podcast to grow in terms of wealth and prosperity, then you would try to worship Venus. So I'd say, hey, Tara, go worship Venus. And you say, well, how do I do that? What does Venus look like? I don't understand. It's this rock in space. So I would say, well, let's find a deity. Let's find an archetype that represents Venus. And you can go to the Roman tradition, Venus, or Aphrodite in the Greek tradition, or Lakshmi in the Indian tradition. And so we can put an idol of Lakshmi, empower that idol, start worshiping it, start making offerings. And as we worship that archetype activates inside of us, right? So this was the sophistication the Indian people had. Then the Mughals came in, the Muslim invaders came in and said, we don't believe in idol worship. So they went and destroyed all the idols of India. They went and destroyed this whole system. And they said, if you're caught worshiping idols, we will execute you, right? And so all of these things had to get hidden and suppressed and put away. And we had hundreds of years of Muslim rule. Then after the Mughals left India, the British came in. And the British came in and said, hey, we have this beautiful Christianity system, and we don't have all these different, pantheon of deities. We just have one. Just worship Jesus, and that's it. And so they sort of instituted that system. And the British were very smart. They said, let's take the smartest people and let's educate them in a British way and teach them how sophisticated our Western system is. And my family, one of those, families that were recognized and said, you know what, we're going to give you a British education. We're going to teach you Western science. And my family started to say, wow, this Western system is so elegant and so amazing, like Western medicine and Western philosophy. And we became enamored with Greek philosophy and Roman philosophy. And then we became leaders in India. And we looked at the Indian systems as backwater village people thinking, superstitious thinking. And so in my family, we kind of looked, if you went in my family and said, I went to see an astrologer, they'd be like, what's wrong with you? Why are you going to that backcountry village, superstitious, witchy stuff? The Western system makes sense. So we were sort of colonized, our systems were suppressed, and we were also then given a different narrative. And so now I'm realizing that, wait a minute, as a Western educated engineer, I'm starting to see, wow, those ancient Indian people had some very powerful knowledge system that was, again, subjugated. And so again, today I see how the decolonization movement is taking place, and there's a resurrection of indigenous traditions. And I'm saying, hey, why can't I resurrect my indigenous system? Because it has a lot of applicability to the modern world challenges. And in all this talk about astrology in the Western world, what about honoring where it originally came from, the original system that it was, and how powerful it was? And I still can't find a historical proof that, because right now, if everything you read in the colonist history is astrology came from Babylon or Persia or from the Greeks, but it just doesn't make sense from the star point of view.
And I'm just curious, how would you reconcile what you just said about the indigenous people using idols that are related to the stars to create energy in their lives? And then how do you reconcile that with people today talking about spirituality and connecting with their higher self and connecting with the universe? Is it all the same energy, or are we kind of tapping into a specific energy when we do that?
Yeah, so the Vedic system understands that we as human mind cannot really grasp what is consciousness and what is our higher self. It's really hard to understand. And so we created these archetypes, and very similar to Jungian psychology, we created archetypes to help sort of direct and focus the mind on a particular energy that we want to accomplish. And, if you ask people, Hindu tradition or Vedic tradition is, they'll say it's polytheism, but it actually isn't. It's monotheism. There's one supreme energy, one supreme force, and that is the divine force, and your divine higher self is connected to that force. So when you say consciousness, universe, and higher self, we're talking about one particular energetic entity that is too difficult to understand. So how do we access that? We use archetypes to access them. So when I say, hey, if you want wealth and prosperity, people will say, oh, yeah, you just cultivate abundance in yourself. That's kind of hard. That's hard to grasp for most people. What do you mean cultivate abundance? Like just dream about it, write about it? Like, how do I do that? But if I say, go to Lakshmi and pray to Lakshmi. So you get this Lakshmi idol or a Venus idol or an Aphrodite idol, doesn't matter, some representation of Venus energy. And you set it up, this brass or marble or stone statue, and you start almost like a kid pretending it's real. And you say, I'm going to offer you some sweets. I'm going to offer you some flowers. I'm going to offer you a candle. I'm going to light some incense. I'm going to offer you some water and my favorite crystal and this leaf that I found outside. And you just keep worshiping it. We believe in Indian tradition, you've energized that idol. It's become energized. It's not just idle anymore. It's active. But truly what's happening is you're activating that archetype in yourself. You're using the form as a stepping stool to activate in yourself. And eventually you go beyond the form, you go beyond the idol, and you connect to the higher self and that higher consciousness energy, and that shifts in your life. So we use these images as archetypal stand-ins to connect to our higher self at the end of the day, because it gives you something to focus, concentrate on. Now, in the Indian tradition has mantras and chants and rituals and this whole rich system that you can sort of follow a process and a procedure to activate that energy.
I love that. I feel like you just wrapped it up in a bow for me because you're right. Manifest abundance. Like, what does that look like? And I bet a lot of people listening to this are like feeling the same way sometimes. And you almost don't want to sound ignorant because you're like, oh yeah, yeah, like let's manifest abundance. Like, and I think the way you just said that was perfect. I would love to learn more about that. Is that this? I'm assuming this is all in your book.
Yeah, the book is like an on-ramp, right? Because right
Oh,
now, if somebody said, "Hey Vish, I love the reading you gave me. I want to learn more about Vedic astrology," the only books out there prior to today are books for serious students who are like you said, Tara, like I don't know if I can comprehend this. These books are complicated. And you'll pick up a book and within a chapter, you like feel completely overwhelmed and give up. And the Western astrology is nice because it's very accessible, right? So my role was, how do I take this vast, complex Indian Vedic system of astrology and really distill it down to just a basic understanding, a basic on-ramping? So my book that has come out today is that sort of taste of, okay, here is another system that is probably the original system, and here are these 9 planetary archetypes. We use 9 planets in Vedic system. Here are the archetypes. Here's what Venus means. Here's what Jupiter means. Here's what Mars means. Here's what Mercury means. Let me just explain them through some storytelling, through some mythology of what these archetypes are, and then how to recognize those archetypes in your life. So when somebody shows up with a white or pink and feminine energy, you know that's Venus showing up. You want Jupiter energy, wisdom, knowledge. Okay, that's going to be some teacher or some priest that shows up in your life. Or somebody with an orange turmeric dot on their forehead. That's Jupiter energy. Jupiter's color is orange, right? So why do I have turmeric on my forehead? This part of the body is what? The third eye, right? Many of your listeners know that's the Ajna chakra, the third eye. I want to access deeper spiritual wisdom and knowledge. So I put turmeric on this location and it opens up that energy, which allows me to share wisdom, right? Otherwise, I was about to wipe it off from my morning puja, and then I thought, wait, this is the right audience. I can put it on. I'll leave it on. Because in ancient times, that's what people did. They put different colors to activate different energies. If you want to be more of a warrior, you want Mars energy, you put red. Red gives you the ability to have strength and good health. So that's, I think, what's starting to happen is I'm realizing that this consciousness system is lost. Can I write about it in an accessible way for everyday people? That when they read my book, after they finish reading it, they're going to go through life with just a different level of understanding and consciousness about these planets. And I give some very simple rituals of what to do to activate those energies as an on-ramp. And I believe when you start on these things, the next level comes to you automatically, right? You want to activate abundance. You start with Venus, you find a stand-in archetype for Venus, you activate it. All of a sudden, the right financial planner comes in your life, or the right partner comes in your life, or the right job opportunity opens up, and you're like, wow. And for me, it's been, is that a coincidence? I did this thing and then this thing happened. Is it a coincidence? But it happens so many times now. I'm like, whoa, it's not a coincidence. I feel like I've reached behind the matrix, adjusted a dial, and then come back and be like, oh, that thing worked. That's what starts to happen.
It's like one more way to get into the flow of the universe, right? Like really tap into that universal energy for our own benefit. I mean, it's there always, but we're not accessing it necessarily on purpose. And it sounds like this is a way to do that.
Yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people kind of bumble along and by trial and error, they figure things out. And here's this very elegant system that has been passed down for thousands of years, and it's integrated and maintained, and it's literally a procedural way to tap into the universe. And when you start to open up to it, you start to realize that you have incredible ability, first of all, to understand yourself and your soul journey, and then to make choices that align with that journey. And then you start to have more ease because you're aligned with your deeper consciousness.
For centuries, mythology has been used as a way of sharing stories, which were handed down from generation to generation. And I know that you have some ideas about how that relates to our current human struggles or all human struggles. Could you let us know a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the skeptical engineer was, mythology has the word myth in it, it must be made up. Right? So I was like, mythology is all myth and it's just stories. But then I started to realize that mythology is a misnomer, because a mythological story describes a certain energetic pattern that mimics the energetic pattern of our own lives. So as I started going deeper into Vedic mythology and understanding the mythology of the planets, I would see a client and they would start telling me about their life story. And I would say, I've heard this story before. And it wasn't somebody else's story. It was one of the stories of the mythology that I've been studying. And so I could tell them what's going to happen next in the story because I've seen this pattern before, right? They're telling me their life story and they're into 3 chapters of it. I've read the 10 chapters of that very story. So I can tell them this is what's going to happen in chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. And then their life plays out that way. And they're like, how did you make that prediction? I said, well, I've seen that story before. So you start to realize that mythology is nothing but it's like the gossip of the gods in a way. This is the struggles they had. This is the fights they had. This is the unrest they had. They weren't perfect beings. And then you start to see, when you start to see yourself in that mythology, you start to know the story of your life and where it's going to go and what you can do about it. So I think mythology has the power of inspiring us and giving us a pattern recognition of our own stories and stories around us. And then we can do something about it. And I found that when in Indian mythology, when you start to worship those particular heroes of those stories, you start to bring in some of those qualities into your own life. So then I'm like, is it mythology? Is it a story? Or is it actually happening right now all the time? And what I'm realizing with a lot of my clients that when I tell them the mythology story, they're like, wow, that's happening in my life right now. How did you know? And then I can tell them, well, here's how you can work through that energy, and then they work through it and things improve in their life. Then you start to realize like, wow, this is not a myth anymore. This is a living pattern of human existence, of the human story right now, told through story. The other aspect is that mythology helps communicate information that we cannot articulate in words. So when you listen and learn about mythology, you are actually getting information through that. To learn about these planets, when you learn the mythology of the planets, you understand the planet's energy. So that's how teaching happens in the Indian system as well. It's all through story.
Well, that leads me perfectly into the next question because I think we all want to have a crystal ball and we all want to know what the future holds. And you mentioned predictions and you alluded to this a little bit earlier as well. Do you have any suggestions or tips of the ways that we can actually actively use and manage this energy that we're receiving through our birth chart?
So what's fantastic about the Vedic system is it has a very powerful predictive ability. And Tara, like you were asking earlier about you don't have your birth time. So for clients, what a lot of astrologers are able to do is they do what's called a rectification. They ask you about all your life events, and they back calculate and triangulate to a birth time that would predict those events at those times of life. So I've had clients where they didn't know they were born in a war zone. They didn't know the birth time within a 10-day span. And I could get to the day and the time that would predict all the events that happen in their life. It's an involved procedure, but it
Wow.
can be done. So then how does an average person use astrology? So the first thing is obviously you visit an astrologer, they can do lots of things. But if you don't visit an astrologer and you read my book, you're going to say, I have this challenge in life and it's of this nature. I'm struggling to find a good life partner. And love is connected to Venus. So you're going to say, okay, there must be, based on what I learned about Venus in Vish's book, it says that Venus is about love. I'm having challenge with love. I need to activate Venus. So then you can think that that's the weak planet in your chart. Without even looking at your birth chart, without going to an astrologer, you know that that's the archetype that is not being honored. So let me take care of Venus. Let me wear more pink. Let me wear more white. Let me worship a feminine deity. Or I'm having anger challenges in life. I'm getting angry all the time. Oh, well, I read the book and Mars is the planet that's connected to anger. I must have some Mars challenge. Let me work on calming Mars down. Then you start saying, let me, not wear red as often. Let me do some exercise because Mars likes exercise. And I take care of that energy and you start to bring those things down. I'm suffering with mental health challenges. Well, that's the moon. The moon is connected to the mind. So there must be something going on with my moon. Let me start tracking the moon cycles. Let me pay attention to the moon. Let me stare at the moon at night. It's going to ease the mind. So you start to find ways to actively manage. So I think the 1, 2, 3 step for everyday people is figure out what's challenging in your life and see if you can root cause it to a planet. Start doing some work to calm that planet down and notice if things are shifting in your life. As an astrologer, that's what I do. People come to me, they tell me their challenges. I try to root cause it in the chart, find the planet at fault, give them a remedy for that planet. That energy gets eased. They start to have ease in that area of life. That's the concept.
That's so interesting. I can't wait to get this book myself. I had someone do a reading for me one time, and I didn't know, like Tara, I didn't know what time I was born, and I said, "Well, just give me, she's a friend. Give me just a little bit, little tidbit." And she didn't miss a beat. She goes, "You're a warrior beast. You were a warrior beast in your last life." But
And was
but she
that
didn't
it? Or
laugh.
did she do you did she give
That's
you
it.
anything else?
No, like
You're
I
like, what
think
am
I
I
was dead.
supposed to do with that?
I
And I
was
think
like,
that question of
what's that?
that question of what am I supposed to do with it is the engineer mind in me, is that if something's broken, I have to find a way to fix it. That's my engineering background. And so then I realized astrology is no good if you don't give somebody some answer of what do I do with this? You gave me this information.
Exactly.
Now what do I do with it? And that's the important part of it. And the Vedic system has this whole body of remedial measures. They call them remedies. I don't know if there's a better word for it, but they're called remedies. And they're like, here's how you patch up that energy. Here's how you improve that energy. Here's how you accentuate that energy or attenuate that energy. And I don't think the Western system has as much sophistication in offering you something to do with it. Like, wow, you told me something amazing about myself, but now what do I do with it? That is important.
I'm not sure if that was amazing, but it would explain, I guess, a lot that I am a warrior, I guess. Anyway, it's Amazon warrior beast is what she said. Oh my goodness. How can we interpret life events around us through the lens of planetary archetypes?
Yeah, great question. So when I'm looking at an astrology chart, I'm looking at an event that happened thousands and thousands of miles away. Hey, you're born and Saturn was on the eastern horizon and Saturn causes challenges. You've had a very challenging life. And people are like, oh, yeah, that's right. But I'm looking at a planet way out. Saturn is way, way out there to make an interpretation about somebody's life. What about stuff right in front of our face? Why can't we do that? Why can't we say that, hey, this happened? Yesterday, I was working with a client and a fire truck pulled out outside my window. Sirens blaring, fire truck, fireman, red truck. I'm like, okay, well, Mars rules fire and red. Mars is asking me to pay attention to this person's Mars in their chart. So I look at Mars, and then all of a sudden the person's like, wow, how did you triangulate on that? I'm like, because I'm paying attention to what's happened here and now. So I think it's important as you develop consciousness, you start to notice every little thing around you having some meaning. It's almost like the universe is constantly giving us signs and communicating with us, and we're just not tuned into it. And sometimes, somebody loses somebody in their family and they go to the psychic, and the psychic and the medium says, oh, I hear so and so is talking to me and telling me this message. But people who aren't psychic, sometimes they have everyday experiences like, wow, this person just appeared and delivered my mom's favorite book to me, or flower, or food, or I'm at this restaurant, there's my mom's favorite dish on it, or oh, my long lost child or brother or whatever. They're communicating through all sorts of other means. A hummingbird shows up and you're like, oh, that's so and so's grandma, right? So I think the universe and people who have passed on, they're constantly sending us the signals and signs, and we're just so busy we don't tune into it. So as a first step, we need to all slow down, right? The more we can slow down, the more present we can be, the more we notice things. And we start to then connect dots, right? Like Tara, you have so much pink in your background and white. There's a lot of Venus energy going on, for sure. You have a gray wall. There must be some psychic ability that's connected to Ketu. You must have some other abilities that are there, right? I don't know. Does that line up?
It does for me. Tracy may have a different reason for having a gray background, though.
Yeah, Tracy's got even more deeper sort of, because gray is ash and things that burn to the ground, and that's Ketu. And so there's a lot of spiritual energy with you, Tracy. You have a deep understanding of spirituality, and you almost want to leave things behind and just focus on spirituality.
Wow.
That's now. I will tell you, that is now. I wasn't always like that. And Tara actually brought me into this world, and I can't get enough of it now. So you're right on the money on the now, but that wasn't always. I was kind of like you, more of a skeptic, and that's part of the reason why we started this channel, was that Tara's always been so embraced, even at a really young age, oddly, into weird. I mean, like, that's weird to me. that she'd be into chakras at like 5. I don't know. That's weird. But as I've gotten older and I met Tara, which was years ago, she kind of brought this into me, and I have been enthralled, and I've been so blessed to meet people like you and people that have been opening my eyes. I mean, Tara likes to think she opened my eyes, but no, I'm just kidding. She actually did. But I now, you're hitting the nail on the head now, because actually funny, before we get on today, I said I was watching this other podcast because I was, I'm trying to soak it all up. And she goes, "Did you watch ours?" I go, "I'm going to." I can't. I only have so much time in the day, but
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you. You hit the nail on the head for like the now, for
Yeah.
sure.
And that's again just knowing that I know that, and Rahu and Ketu is a whole longer discussion, but they're the lunar nodes, and Ketu is a lunar node that has a mythology of everything burning away and leaving things behind and becoming more spiritual. And today, as we're speaking, the moon and Ketu are together in the sky in Virgo. So I have the chart in the background. So I know that moon is with Ketu. Moon is also another planet that is connected to the color white, and Ketu is connected to the color gray. And when I look at your screen now, today, Tracy, I see white and gray together. And I'm like, okay, and those two planets are together. That must mean something to do with Moon and Ketu, mind and spirituality. But Moon and Ketu in a star constellation that is connected to the occult. In the Vedic system, we also have some more distant star constellations beyond the scope of my book. But the star constellation it's in is connected to the hand and palmistry, which is an occult subject, which is again something beyond. And so that's how I can make that interpretation of what's right in front of me. There's the planets far in space and what's in front of me, and put them together. And that sort of ability, I think, is what I want people to take away from my book, is this: just start noticing things around you and practicing. And sometimes you make it up, right? It's like, okay, let me see. I'm going to say, Tracy's wants to leave things behind and make a big shift in her life and wants to be more spiritual. I'm making it up from what I saw with Moon and Ketu in the sky today, its location and the colors I see on my screen. And you're like, yeah, that story is correct. Right. And it's like, oh, wow. Okay. My powers are improving. My abilities are improving. And so just practicing that every day of noticing what's around you, making some interpretation. And maybe for a while you're 40%, 50% accurate. At some point you'll get 60, 70% accurate. And then you're kind of getting into the astrology realm. A good astrologer is usually around 70% accurate. That's probably as good as it gets. Unless somebody's, really super conscious, then obviously they're 100% accurate.
I think it's so true that the universe is constantly sending us signs and signals, and we just ignore it, or we don't put faith or stock in what we're seeing. We just kind of dismiss it as, oh, that was just a coincidence, but it actually was a message for you. So we just need to be more aware and take those things in, and we can create our own meaning around those things. They don't have to be something that, we're getting the meaning from a textbook. It's something that we can create, because if the thought comes into our mind, and this goes back to the consciousness thought process, is there's a reason that we had that thought tied to whatever that signal or sign might be. So I think that's really important for people to just be aware of and remember, because we do forget about that, as we go throughout our day. And I know you mentioned a little bit earlier, um, there's different times in our life that we have big decisions to make, right? Whether it be choosing to go down a different path with a career, picking a job, whether we're going to get married or stay single, just major life decisions. It sounds like to me, this type of astrology would be very helpful when we are making big life choices like that. So can you speak a little bit around that topic of how and why that would be important for us to maybe check in with this Vedic astrology before we make a big life choice like that?
Yeah. So in the business world, when I was an executive, we used what was called a SWOT analysis. SWOT is a term in the business world. That's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you can do that for a business, for an individual, for a company, for a brand. And you're just trying to understand, okay, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what opportunities do we have, what threats do we have? And then make a strategic decision based on that leverages the strengths and minimizes the weaknesses and goes after the opportunities and, mitigate threats. So when I look at a birth chart for a person or a company, I do this for companies as well. I look at the birth chart of the company. It's almost like I'm doing a super SWOT analysis of that consciousness or that energy of that entity, whether it's that human being or the company that they're working with. So then you can start to say for an individual when they're making career choices, wouldn't you want to make a career choice that leans into your strengths and avoids your weaknesses, right? And a lot of times people make choices that are exactly the opposite. They go into things where they're not leveraging their strengths, they're not happy, they're not going after their opportunities, and they're threatened all the time. So I feel like Vedic astrology gives us a nice map to know so that we knowingly choose if we decide to go into something that accentuates our strengths or we go into something that is not aligned, but then at least you're going eyes wide open. Because sometimes human will is very strong. It's like, yeah, I know I'm weak at that, but I want to do that. Fine, go for it. But at least you're aware. So I think Vedic astrology for me is more of an awareness tool, but keep the power and decision making in the hands of the client. And I think that's where a lot of astrologers fall short, is they sort of usurp the power from the client. And so at the end of the book, I wrote the not the forward, the end word, the afterword. I wrote a couple of pages on how to find a good astrologer, and that there's many factors there. Number one, make sure the astrologer is not usurping your power. You have to have the power as a client. Make sure the person is kind, gentle, compassionate, and good-hearted, and they don't have an ulterior motive. They're not trying to sort of energetically hijack you. And then find an astrologer that you have good chemistry with, because not everyone's aligned, right? If I took two birth charts and put them together, sometimes it's really bad alignment, right? Those two people don't work together. And so there's certain people where I just don't work well with them. They don't work well with me. I'm not a good fit for them. And of course, you're not going to put your chart and astrologer's chart together, choose an astrologer. You don't have that ability, but you can intuitively sense, you know what, this person doesn't feel right to me. Trust that intuition. So I think it's very important when you select energy workers, healers, any of people in those realms of work, feel the chemistry, feel if it's right or not. Your gut's usually telling you if it's right or not. And if your gut is saying, you know what, this is not good, just stay away. You'll find somebody else who's the right fit for you. So I think that's very important.
I had another question for you, and this is going to sound, I'm just going back to what you were talking about Greek mythology mirroring like our struggles here as, as humans. Is there a particular myth or story of the gods that you find is prevalent or is something that's repeated more than another one?
So so there's a whole Vedic mythology system, and that's mostly lost. I don't know as much about the Greek mythology, but the Vedic mythology I do. And there's so many myths that are, repeated quite a lot. But one of them is interesting. A lot of people in the yoga world chant something called the Hanuman Chalisa. Have you heard of this before? Hanuman Chalisa. It's like a lot of yogis when they go to yoga studio, somebody's playing the harmonium and they're chanting this long chant, Shri Guru Charanam Saroja Raja. It goes, it's like a many verses, and it's a chant to the monkey god Hanuman. And it's an interesting story because the mythology is being celebrated this Halloween. This October 31st and 1st is Diwali, very, very big Indian festival. And it's a celebration of light and the return of light to the return of an exiled king. There's a king named Rama who was exiled, and he came back to his kingdom on that day, and everyone welcomed him with lights. But one of the very powerful forces in it is Hanuman, who's this monkey god warrior who helped defeat the enemy. And the enemy was a man named Ravana. And Ravana is very powerful, but very intelligent demon king. And he knew astrology. And he said, I want to create the perfect birth chart. So I'm going to capture all the planets. And I'm going to chain them up in different parts of my house to make the perfect birth chart for myself. And then I can be all powerful and conquer. So he literally grabbed a hold of Mars, grabbed Mercury, grabbed Jupiter, grabbed Saturn, and chained them up in different places. And Saturn was chained up, but Saturn is usually the giver of hardship and difficulty and challenge. And Hanuman arrives at the king's palace. And when he arrives, he sees Saturn chained up. He says, oh my gosh, Saturn, I better look away because if you look at me, I'm going to have misfortune. But wait a minute, I see you chained up in chains. Let me rescue you. And Saturn says, don't come close to me. If you come close to me, you'll have hardship. And Hanuman says, don't worry, I'll look away and I'll cut the chains off. And he cuts all the chains off and Saturn gets freed. And Saturn says, you have freed me. Therefore, anybody who worships you, I will free them of my gaze. Anybody who worships you, Hanuman, I will ease their journey when my time in their chart comes. So when people go through a Saturn period, meaning a Saturn return, Saturn goes over where the natal Saturn was in the chart, or Saturn goes over the moon. We're actually going through this as a country right now. If you think about our political and federal situation at the moment, we're going through Saturn over the moon, 7 years of very, very challenging times. We're probably 3, 4 years into it. One way to relieve the burden of Saturn's gaze is to worship Hanuman. And automatically, all these Western yoga people, I'm talking about American yoga people, they're chanting this Hanuman Chalisa. A lot of them don't realize it, but they're asking, praying to Hanuman and relieving that difficult Saturn energy that they might be facing. So that's one of those stories that I think when people are in major, major challenge, when I look in the chart, it's Saturn doing something. And by chanting that Hanuman story, they start to get alleviation. And it all comes from that
When
mythology of Saturn being rescued by Hanuman.
Wow, that is such an interesting story, and I'm just curious with the chanting, you said that they don't know what they're doing. Where are they getting this from? How are they being taught what to chant?
It's like, I guess, cool in the yoga world right now.
Oh,
And I see these, yogis, and they have like tattoos of Hanuman on their arms. I'm like, how do they know that? It's just they're doing yoga, they're meditating, they're starting to get this consciousness, and they're like, I feel drawn, I like the sound of this, and I want to memorize it, I want to learn it. And I'm like, why are all these Western yoga people singing this Sanskrit song? Like, how's that happening? And then when I know the mythology, I'm like, oh, they must be going through a hard time, and their consciousness led them to that. So a lot of times your intuition draws you to certain sounds or songs or chants, and then you start to, without knowing it. But an astrologer, I can connect the dots and say, oh, this is why they're doing it. But you'll see, if you talk to a lot of yoga people, they're very familiar with Hanuman Chalisa. In fact, there's an artist named Krishna Das who's a Western guy. He's like a Jewish guy from Chicago, I think, and he's one of the most famous singers of this particular chant, even though he's a Westerner. And he's, I think, performing in India right now. I saw on his Instagram, he's in Bombay performing in India to an Indian audience, but he's a white American guy singing this Sanskrit
that's
chant
funny.
to Hanuman.
Wow, that is so interesting. It's like the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't
How
know.
much,
There's
right?
just so
Hmm.
much to learn, and every day is a learning process. But Vish, we just want to say thank you. This has been amazing and eye-opening. And I'm just curious, do you offer readings yourself?
I do. I offer readings if people are interested. I'm booked out a little few months out at the moment, but obviously you can find me. My website is vishchatterji.com. And so you can go there, and from there you can actually calculate your own birth chart with the right. You can try different times and see what lines up for you. And really, my request is for people to buy the book and really learn about the system. I think even to make time with me more efficient, it's good to read the book first. So my real request is not for people to come search me out for reading, but buy my book and learn about it and start applying this knowledge and consciousness to your life, and notice what happens. And then if you feel like there's something happening, then yeah, obviously reach out to me or someone to get a reading.
Absolutely. Well, again, your book is launched today and it's
Yeah.
titled Astrology Decoded: The Secret Science of India's Sages. So I'm super excited to get a copy of that. I cannot wait to read it. And we just want to say congratulations to you for the new book. This is so exciting. And before we wrap up, Vish, is there any final messages you'd like to leave with anyone listening today?
Well, as we're finishing the conversation, the sun is shining onto some blinds, like metal blinds, and reflecting onto my face, which is kind of interesting. So the sun is showing up, and the sun is the planet of everything, right? Everything revolves around the sun. We call the sun a planet in the Vedic system, and it is your will and your sort of deeper purpose is how we look at the sun. So for everybody listening, this is the omen for you to really listen to what your soul is trying to tell you and start to honor that. Live a life aligned to your deeper soul, not based on what programming you had from parents or society or peer groups. Like really start to live for you, I think is what that omen of the sun shining bright into my eyes right now means. But thank you both for having me on the show. So happy to have this conversation with you, Tara and Tracy. And I'm so happy we're all here in California. So we're same planets rising at the same time for all of us at the moment.
Absolutely. And we want to thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you sharing your information and your knowledge and honoring us with your time today. So thank you so much. We
Thank you.
appreciate you.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Tracy.